There are a host of reasons and excuses for the behavior of many pastors and Christian leaders, and we will touch on them as we go forward because many of them are the same reasons and excuses given by German pastors in the 1930s. But the language of many contemporary American Christians is different than that of the German pastors of the 1930s in one principal respect. The American Christians of our own time have taken to using the term the gospel in a new way, as though by doing this, they hope to set religious and theological issues apart from all else, as though this were possible. And so now, when many American church leaders shrink from taking a particular stand, they often say they are doing so for the sake of the gospel. It is for the sake of the gospel that we will not contest these things, they say, that we will assiduously avoid taking sides in these terribly divisive culture wars, and will even more assiduously avoid being identified with any political party or candidate. The idea is that anything that might conceivably be accused of being political is manifestly out of bounds. But how can we have come to this bizarre pass? If there are injustices done to our fellow Americans, are we not to protest and, if necessary, even fight politically for what is right, just as Bonhoeffer and Wilberforce did? When is speaking against injustice merely political? And when and how did gospel-related issues retreat to where they can only be those issues of justice that fall on one side of the political spectrum? Are we to be hoodwinked so easily? Who decided that being political means we are not being gospel-oriented? Part of the problem is that times have changed. As James R. Wood well describes in a recent article in First Things magazine titled How I Evolved on Tim Keller, the problem is not at all that wonderful pastors like New York's Tim Keller were wrong in their assessments that we should avoid politics and culture warring, but that as circumstances in our own culture changed, they eventually became wrong by sticking to a script that was no longer right for the time in which we found ourselves. Woods writes, Keller's third way philosophy has serious limitations as a framework for moral reasoning as well. Too often it encourages in its adherents a pietistic impulse to keep one's hands clean, stay above the fray, and at a distance from imperfect options for addressing complex social and political issues. It can also produce conflict aversion, and thus it is instinctively accommodating. By always giving equal airtime to the flaws in every option, the third way posture can also give the impression that the options are equally bad, failing to sufficiently recognize ethical asymmetry. As a result of such thinking, many have continued to believe that the approaches to the culture that worked in 1995 or 2005 must still work today. How one wishes that were true. But what worked then does not and cannot work anymore. And we are obliged to face this, just as the German church was obliged to see that what worked under the Kaisers would not work under Adolf Hitler. The circumstances have changed, and we must adjust. Of course, most Christian leaders have not seen the change and have not adjusted, but continue to act as though it is an unseemly betrayal of their calling to say anything that might open them to the accusation of being political. During the recent pandemic, when churches were preposterously deemed non-essential by governors and mayors, while marijuana dispensaries and casinos and strip clubs remained open, many pastors behaved as though it was their Christian duty not to speak, as though this were the winsome way forward. This was a deeply disgraceful moment for the American church. Believers have always been called to speak the truth and to fight against injustice of any kind. How can we let others, rather than our own consciences, dictate what we say and do?